Welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the exploration and cultivation of the outside genius found in neurodivergence.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast. My name is Lillian Skinner. Today we're going to talk about free will again because I wanted to put up a counter to the last one where we talked about the book Behave by Robert Sapolsky, who talked about how we basically don't have free will. I like Robert Sapolsky. I think that his argument is pretty solid in the sense that we are pretty predetermined and we have a little bit of wiggle room, but it's this person, this place because of this outcome, and they didn't really have that much impact over it. It was kind of predetermined. And I definitely feel that because as a autistic savant, the society is not interested in my skill set. It's not interested in my knowledge. One of my friends wrote me and said, my son's doing so well, both in the podcast together for the child podcast. And last year she was really upset because they were telling her there was something wrong with her son. And I was like, there's nothing wrong with your kid. He's brilliant. Just keep going and do not listen to them. They're looking at him in average and he's exceptional. Exceptional is not average. There's nothing you can do about that. If you take the words of preschool teacher that your 2-year-old is not normal and they're high functioning but different, I would just run with that because that just means they're smarter. That just means that they're moving through the world as they need to move through the world because the outliers don't move through the world like average. And there's nothing wrong with that. And we should just let them be. And so she took my advice and she went all in on it. And now she's my podcast co-host because it's worked out perfectly. And she's like, we have to tell everybody. It's great because she told me this morning he's doing fantastic and she's so proud of him. And I'm glad. I'm delighted. I know this from my own children. I know this from myself. I know that we are very aware growing up as little kids, but we're just overwhelmed. And the reason we're overwhelmed is we take in so much more than other people. But there is such a huge benefit of that. I have always sort of sat back and taken in the rooms I went into. I just can't jump in and be like, hey, everybody. I don't have that level of comfort and I need to get a lay of the land. But it saves me from making so many gross errors because I do move through the world so differently. I do move through the world in a manner that's not following the rules of society. I have my own rules. My own rules trump the societal rules. The societal rules are 2D. The societal rules don't actually make sense. It's like, well, but why are you doing that? They don't have a reason. You just do it. And this is actually ties into my free will conversation because I was looking for the other person to use for free will. And who do you counter with? Robert Sapolsky. Who's equal to him. There's not many. And so I looked up Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett is the chair of the philosophy department over at Tufts University. And I listened to his free will and I watched a bunch of his videos. I also read 2 of his books and I had a huge epiphany. And was super excited. And I'm really glad I did this because I wasn't planning on it, but I felt, I should have a counter to this. And something huge came from it. So I'm going to go back to that. First, I'm going to stay with this free will argument, and then I'm going to round out how this affects us, how much I had this hunch, and I think it's true. So I will start first with this free will argument. This is his free will argument. He said, we have to have free will because it's good for society. You can't just let people run around doing whatever they want, then they'll be despondent and they won't do anything. That's not really an argument of whether or not we have free will. That's just whether or not we should really be allowed to say it. And then his other argument was, there's a boulder that dislodges from the side of a mountain and goes tumbling down the mountain. And it takes a path that's chaotic. Meanwhile, you have a skier who goes down the side of a mountain, and she goes down that mountain 1,000 times before she hits the Olympics. But each time she goes down, it's around the same time, it's around the same speed, it's around the same projection, it's around the same space. And we know within a certain variability what her outcome will be. And the difference between the two is control. I'm really confused by his argument. It doesn't actually make sense. The difference between the two isn't control. The difference between the two is one is a rock and the other is a human being. Like one can think. I'm not a rock. I'm totally being considered an animal. You can call me an animal. I see myself as an animal, a human animal. And I think that humans have higher cognitive abilities, but I don't think humans have higher sensing intelligence abilities. I think animals do. So for me, I think animals are plenty smart. Ran an animal down the side of a mountain on a sled, on its own, whatever, it's going to have more of a natural pattern that's going to be tighter around the average over and over again than that rock, because the rock doesn't have control, is his point. But do you think an animal has free will? I actually think an animal does have free will. I actually don't think a human does, because the animal, if it lives in its natural state, I think it has free will. If it doesn't live in its natural state, well, then I don't think it has free will. It's like your dog. And last time I talked about being a dog versus a cat. Cats don't have like 100% free will if you're keeping them inside all the time and they're not able to go out and live their own lives. But there's a reason we live in societies like feral cats don't necessarily have the best lives, but it's partly because they're not on the savannah. They're not living in their natural state, just like we're not living in our natural state as hunter-gatherers with lush forests that can feed us and we can just travel around and not worry. So we have this interesting perspective here where he's saying, well, compared to a rock, I have free will, I have control. And I'm like, but you're comparing me to a rock. I don't think that's an argument. That's like saying, like, compared to a planet, the sun is hot. They're two different things. You're not really comparing apples to apples. You're comparing apples and oranges. Then I found another one of his arguments. And this one is about free will. And I found it on Big Think. And I'll put that in the show notes. And it was talking about how he gave this scenario where this guy went into a doctor and said, I'm going to put this brain implant into you. And that way we'll be able to decide for you and you won't have to think anymore. And the guy's like, all right, great. And guy went, I guess he committed a crime. And in the court case said, Your Honor, it's not my fault. I have a brain implant and that's why I did it. And they brought the doctor in who supposedly put this implant in. She said, haha, kidding. I never put that in there. I wouldn't make you, I'm not giving you something that would cause you to do that. That's not what I was doing. And you don't actually have that. I was just saying that so that you would believe it, kind of doing an experiment. And his point is that, I guess if you take people's free will away, then they say they don't have to do anything. But I think he's, again, making a very simplistic argument over what free will is. Free will is saying, I have the choices to make it. And of course, there's varying degrees to free will, but he's saying all or nothing, but he's not really even going over what free will is or how it's impacted. Nobody's putting an implant in your brain. You still can make decisions every day. So I don't really get his arguments. And I listened to him further and further, and it hit me. He's a 2D thinker. Everything he talks about, I watched this one thing, he kept going on and on with technology, which it was kind of hard to listen to him because he was talking about really basic stuff and he was making it very grandiose and big, and it was very simple. I didn't just listen to it once, I actually listened to it twice because the first time I was sort of confused as to exactly what his point was. I knew it was about the brain, I knew it was about how our brain is like a computer, and then somehow he brings in a termite mound and he says the brain is like a termite mound, and he's flip-flopping all around. But the more I listened to it, the more I started to realize something huge. And also it started to enlighten me into why I hate all the humanities classes, because our biology classes, if they're taught by a neurodivergent, which I had a 50% chance that a neurodivergent was teaching like all the science classes growing up. If they're taught by a neurodivergent, they give really amazing Robert Sapolsky-like examples. They show you stories and they backtrack it. But the humanities never do that. And I figured out why, thanks to this guy's talk on the simpleness of human brains. Because I know exactly how computer brains are like human brains. And I got absolutely no new knowledge from his talk. And I also got zero understanding. I am more confused now than ever on how the human brain is like a computer brain. And I could write you a book on that. I find humanities peoples to be enamored with technology in a way I don't understand. Technology is not going to save the world. Technology is just a tool like a stone or anything else we make. It's just yet another tool. It's not going to save the world. A human is going to figure out how to use the technology to save the world. And it's probably not going to be the people that made it because they can't see the full capacity. This is the difference between a big picture person and a small picture person. I went into technology. I am not a small picture person. So I went into the audit side. I went into the security side. I went into reading and understanding the details and learning about it, but not actually implementing it because that's not my bag. I like figuring out things. I liked doing the security side. I liked trying to break things, but I do not care about the maintenance day to day. That seemed like a real quick trip for me to insanity. So I went into it from a bigger perspective. And I just realized that they don't have anything like that in the humanities. I was forced into technology. I didn't get a choice really to go to college for what I wanted. It didn't matter how smart I was funneled into technology with the 2D, 3D. Neurodivergents have unique, extreme gifts and then extreme weaknesses. And the weaknesses make us human and they teach us how to teach other people and they teach us how to relate. And the strengths make us almost not human because our society thinks everybody's supposed to be average. And so if you're outside that average, you are left outside and you're stuck. If you are born poor, you have no free will there. I was born poor. But wait, there's more. I have another example of this because I had two ways this happened to me in my lifetime. When I was a teenager, I got stuck into modeling because I was 6 foot tall and I was pretty. And I signed with one of the biggest high fashion modeling agencies in the world. There were two at the time. And this is the 90s. And I have a very 90s model look. So my 6 foot butt got stuck into modeling and I signed with this agency and I did it. And I turned around and left because I have autism. And even though I didn't know it at the time, what I did know is that this path would take me to a place that was horrible. It was going to kill me. I couldn't do this. I couldn't maintain what they wanted from me. I'm not good at getting pictures taken of me. I don't relax enough and be natural in front of a camera. That's not my natural state. They talk about this in autism. We are too sensitive. We are very organic. We need the outside stimuli. And there's nothing natural about the way photography is done in modeling. There's nothing. You're in a studio. There's no actual real things going on. And I am an extreme creative. I need to actually respond to the environment I am. That's how it works for us. We're not dysfunctional. We're actually extremely reactive to the environment we're in. There's nothing natural about modeling. It is all about fake. And there's just nothing fake about me. I'm extraordinarily authentic. To the degree it gets me in trouble all the time. But it is my neurodivergence that kept me from doing this modeling career. Even though I had the look, I didn't have the personality. And it truly was an instance of not fitting in because they have a certain way of this being done and it didn't allow me to be accommodated. No, it actually was only about me accommodating them. And so I left because I knew what the outcome was. It was going to be really bad. And then the same thing happened to me again in technology. I have seizures. I could not maintain the schedule that they wanted me to stay on. And so I got booted because they couldn't make the most amount of money on me. But nobody ever tells you how to get around that. Nobody ever teaches you, and you're instructed and you're told that there's something wrong with you. And his approach to free will is to make it super basic, 2D, and make it so that you internalize everything is your fault. And there's no discussion. It's philosophy. It's supposed to be a discussion. It's supposed to be about debating and understanding. And he literally takes that away with his approach. I see it closer to what Robert Sapolsky sees it. I see it as very intricate. I see it as very detailed. I see it as multiple dimensions. There's no simplicity there. We are not actually allowed free will because there's gatekeepers and there's gates we have to go through and there's all these stopgaps. And if you are different, you're going to have a harder time. Obviously, Daniel Dennett is not different. He is a 2D thinker. He's the ideal of our system, and he has been allowed through, and he believes that he is the reason for all of that, without any regard for the fact that the system has certain people that it brings up and other people that it keeps down. So his free will argument is deeply flawed, in my opinion, but it serves the system, and that's why I don't trust him. And of course, my sensing data also indicates this to me because my sensing data, when I listen to his stuff, it brings up all sorts of emotions. And then those emotions translate and they're like, no, this dude's a 2D talker. He's only talking about it from, yes, you either work out for the system and it's your choice and it's your decision, or you don't. Everything that he is saying makes it incredibly simplistic. It is, again, Skinner's behaviorism. And I can't get behind his arguments. The way I read his books, and the way I feel when I'm listening to him is the same way I've always felt when I've gotten a 2D teacher. 2D teachers, I keep waiting for it all to gel. I keep waiting for it all to come or crystallize and for me to have complete clarity. And it never happens because theirs is a ladder. Theirs is one rung and then the next rung and the next rung, next rung. And it doesn't ever do that triangular learning. Our sensing gives us data, and then our intelligence gives us data. And we combine them so we have greater knowledge. Now, granted, not everybody has high cognition and everybody has high sensing, but there's plenty of people with average and they are leaving half of their intelligence on the table. Probably more than that. Like I've said, I believe my sensing intelligence is 75% of my intelligence. Now, is my sensing intelligence higher? I think it may be, but it's pretty equal for me. I mean, I am going back and forth with the two. And it is high enough. My cognitive intelligence and my sensing intelligence, the combination leaves me on the outside and makes it so that I don't learn in these environments because they're too slow, they're too basic, and they leave my needs unmet. Since I can't afford any other education system, and the only kind I was able to get was really by educating myself and then educating my own children, And we didn't even have the data when I was younger. We didn't get it till I was a little bit older, and that's when the internet came out. And really, that internet data really wasn't that accessible until later. I did not have free will to choose to find that information. Now, I did find it later, and I did get more free will, and all of this data is more of a chance at free will. But the way he is presenting it, it serves the system. It serves and preserves the system. And this is very important right now. This is very important because we are walking into a time where AI could restrict our access again. It can restrict what information we can find. AI is not accurate, and if we are not allowed access to AI and the information it isn't accurate, and that's the information we're making our choices on, we could all be enslaved again. We have been freed for this little tiny bit because we have more information access, and what has happened is they've locked us down into so many working hours. We can barely talk, we can barely figure it out, we can barely get on top of it, and this will happen again if we don't do something to change that. But even more than that, I think I realized today that Daniel Dennett's whole approach is like a religion. Philosophy has always perplexed me because it's a very much a logical approach. I read Socrates, I read Plato, and I'm like, okay, these guys got it. But there's this modern philosophy thing where they have all these logic rules for it. And I don't know that philosophy needs to be rules. I'm a top-down thinker, so philosophy for me is pretty easy. I can just see it. My brain just does it. I don't use any rules. I don't know why they make it that way. I don't agree with what you're saying. You're just saying it should be this way because it should be this way. You're not actually arguing it. And they use lots of big words. When you read his stuff, he goes on and on and on and on, but he doesn't actually ever prove what he's saying. He just says it should be that way because it's for the best of society. Honestly, I just found him to be a giant trumpeter for the current system. He thinks people need free will so they don't go off on a bender or something. They have a reason to live, or they don't do horrible things. That doesn't mean it exists. That just means they needed guidance and morals. And he's determining they need guidance and morals. Why is he determining they need guidance and morals? They really do think that the masses are stupid and the people born in poverty are stupid. And they really are trying to keep things as they are. They don't want people like me and you to move up through the ranks. All those stories about a neurodivergent person breaking through and proving themselves, that is a bunch of crap. That just means that that person learned how to work the system and prostrate themselves to the degree that they're given it. That's what this whole thing is about. It's about prostrating yourself so that you're a tool for others and they never ask for what you deserve of equality. Everything in the system is completely, utterly set up to destroy the 3D thinkers unless you're in math and science. So this is a perfect example of why Robert Sapolsky is allowed to write a book and be who he is and have all these degrees, but I'm not allowed to be who I am because the people in the group where I am, they're not actually 3D thinkers. They're 2D thinkers. Now, don't get me wrong. This guy is an incredibly smart man in a cognitive way, but his entire premise is that it's a ladder. You do this because of this, because of that, because of this, because of this. There's no triangles involved there. There's no depth involved there. His repeatedly, I've listened to his stuff and his examples, what he's tying it to doesn't actually ever come home. It doesn't make sense. And when I was a kid, I blamed myself. But now that I'm older and I've read so much and I've understood how this really all comes together, I realize that he's saying something really basic with all the biggest words, and I don't agree with his basic premise. I don't believe that we're stupid. I don't believe that people can't figure this out. My whole life, people have been telling me that I can't think for myself. I need to let them think for me, and I disagree with that. And I think it's about time we started taking back our ability to think for ourselves. Why do I need an outside source to tell me how to think and do? He's not talking out of both sides of his mouth, too. He's talking about how we have free will because I can choose like a Coke or a Pepsi at a grocery store. But if you consider that free will, then you're really going at the lowest level of free will. That's like saying an ant can choose between one ice cream puddle and another ice cream puddle, and the ant has the best life in the world. But you take that ant and you put them in a cage, they can only choose what they have in that cage. And we live in society, and society is a cage. And he doesn't talk about that. And he also doesn't talk about the fact that his whole entire premise, and I actually looked this up because I'm not the first person to actually come to this realization. After listening to his things over and over again, I realized this man is basic. He's making everything white or black. It's 2D. And I looked it up, and guess who he is like? There's other criticisms of people saying he's like behaviorism. He's using B.F. Skinner's sort of approach. And that is actually exactly what I'm talking about. We have a world that is incredibly complex, and yet our systems say, no, it's simple. It's black or white. You're either good or you're bad. You either do what you're supposed to do or you don't do it. That is not free will. If I only have two choices, you're forcing me into a very small box and I have to decide. And if you are neurodivergent and you go through our school system, particularly our public school system, but even most of our private school systems, the whole premise is that you will go out into the world and work for others. You will go out into the world and work in our system. There's no premise that you will go out there and start your own business. There's nothing about that. It's either you fit into the box that the corporations want or you don't exist. You get Fs. You should just get kicked out of school because you are worthless and society doesn't like you or want you or need you. That is not education. That is conditioning. And we should just be real about it. I don't care if they want to condition us in our systems. They should just tell us and give us the choice. Free will is about understanding. It's about understanding the whole situation. And we are lied to when they put an education label on our system and they say that it is educating us to be successful in the world. It is really only educating us to be successful in captivity in the employment of others. Now, it is okay if you want to go out and work for others, but I can't. I am too odd, I'm too different, and really my biology is meant for me not to. So I am being limited with my free will. Nobody's told me that there are other choices. I was actually told the other. I was thrown out and was said, oh, you're not valuable. And so what I am proposing is that we build our own system because it's okay if they don't want me. They just need to tell me that when I'm a kid and not try to make me into somebody else because that's what caused mental illness. What is wrong with everyone that they cannot see this? And what is wrong with him that he is serving the system and getting these titles like Father of Modern Philosophy when he's actually causing intense damage to the outliers, to actually everyone, making them think that they have no choice? Because now we're in a collapse of society and people have no clue what to do because they were programmed to do something else. So we've taken that ant who used to have 2 puddles of ice cream to choose from, vanilla or chocolate, and now they're in a cage and there's no ice cream. There's whatever gets thrown into the cage by that person, but if society collapses, guess what? Nothing's being thrown in that cage, and the ant better figure out a way to get out of that cage and find a new life because they're going to die in that cage, waiting for food to come from a source that has gone away. I ask you again, what is free will? Because right now, we have an idea that we live in this society that allows us free will. And if that society collapses, then we might actually truly have free will, but we actually don't know that we have free will, or we actually don't know how to navigate it because we've been left without understanding that free will. And my whole point about this free will thing is that, look, we have to start turning away from what we've been told and figuring it out for ourselves, or we're all going to be in a whole lot of distress very shortly. So thank you everyone for listening. This is the end of my podcast. I am going to focus this year on how our sensing intelligence works. I'm going to focus on our creative intelligence because it is the combination of our cognitive and our sensing intelligence that creates the creative. It's those connections, it's that triangular learning. And my goal has been to identify how the world was and how the humanities particularly have been sort of co-opted for 2D. And our mental health system has been co-opted for 2D because it serves the system. They can make money on you if you are sick, and you can produce money if you are well. And that is the 2 options we have in this world. But there's no in between. And those of us who are very sensitive, those of us with high sensing intelligence, we are going to get sick first. We are the amphibians of the population where we absorb in the toxins first. And I truly believe that this is kind of what's driving so much of our mental illness, so much of our physical illness. And in my next podcast, I'm talking to someone who's going to talk about that trifecta that we typically find in gifted neurodivergence. It's the highly sensitive, highly intellectual people, and they suffer from 3 things. They suffer from Ehlers-Danlos, POTS, and mast cell syndrome. And guess who has them all 3? Me. So I'll be talking with someone and we'll be going over that. And I'm just going to go into our sensing intelligence and how I see it. I am kind of out there on this stuff, but I guarantee you that this will get more and more logical and more useful as we go through the world. If I did not grow up in poverty, if I was not forced to have to take care of myself at a very young age, I would not understand this. But we're all about to have to be able to take care of ourselves. And one of the things that you develop when you go into that is your sensing intelligence. And we need it now. And those of us who are gifted and neurodivergent, we have the most. We have it to spare. We have it in abundance. And if we can cultivate it, we will be able to help others when things go sideways. Thank you for listening. I hope this was valuable. Everyone, take care.
The views, information, and opinions expressed on this podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent Gifted ND Incorporated, Lillian Skinner, or the Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast. This podcast, Lillian Skinner, and Gifted ND Incorporated are not responsible and do not verify the accuracy of the information contained in this podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to inform and educate. The Gifted Neurodivergent Podcast is only available for private, non-commercial use. Any other use of the information contained within this podcast must be done with express written approval and knowledge of Lillian Skinner. You may not edit, modify, or redistribute any part of this podcast. The developer assumes no liability for this podcast or its use on any other podcast or other media.